The battle for the backup quarterback at the University of Utah is over. The winner, Isaac Wilson. But can Utah count on him if they need him this fall? That's what we're going to discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time tuning into our show, make sure you like and subscribe, and you can follow us on X at Locked On Utes, or my personal handle at JT Wistersill. My name is JT Wistersill, and on today's show, we're going to be diving into all the thoughts Kyle Whittingham had during his media availability, talk about some of the players' comments and quotes as well, too. We're going to be talking about Kyle Whittingham saying that Utah is not going to be doing a depth chart probably this year, which, well, yeah, that's something. We'll talk about that at the end. Talk about what I believe is a chance to be one of the best duos in college football, and it resides on the Utah Utes. But first, let's start with the news that one of the biggest questions that Utah football had to answer entering fall camp has been decided. Kyle Whittingham announced that the battle for the backup quarterback job is over, and that is, in fact, Isaac Wilson, who has been named QB2. He did say that Burt Ficklin will still have a role, but didn't specify exactly what it is. That comes to us from Josh Furlong of KSL.com. My thoughts on this situation, I'm not surprised. I said last week I thought Isaac Wilson would be the backup quarterback when Kyle Whittingham started to talk about how Isaac had the experience. And if there's one thing Kyle Whittingham hates, it's when people turn the ball over. And you're more likely to turn the ball over and make those mistakes, which also drive coaches nuts, mistakes, when you have less experience. And it just seemed to be trending towards Isaac Wilson after a year of college football under his belt, a year in which he clearly should have never been out there, that he was probably going to be the guy, and Utah wasn't going to roll with a true freshman. It's just asking a lot of Burt Ficklin, a guy who just got up here in the spring. It's really hard to win as a true freshman. It's one of the reasons I talked about yesterday on my show that I don't think BYU is going to be anywhere close to as good as they were last year because they're relying on a true freshman. And Utah this season, if something does happen to Devon Dampier, they will turn to Isaac Wilson. So the question becomes, can you rely on Isaac Wilson? My answer to that is potentially. It depends on what you need Isaac to do. If Devon Dampier gets hurt and has to be out for an extended stretch of time, and Isaac Wilson has to lead this team through some tough stretches on the season, then no, I don't think Isaac Wilson is going to be able to do that. Based on what we saw last year, I can't sit here and say that Isaac Wilson is going to lead this team to the same heights that Devon Dampier will, because as I'll talk about a little bit more in this episode shortly, I'm incredibly high on Devon Dampier. I've said already, I think he's going to be a top 10 Heisman contender this coming season. Isaac Wilson is not going to be that if he sees extended time. But what I do think Isaac Wilson can be is what Bryson Barnes was on this Utah team a couple years ago. I think back to the 2022 Washington State game up in Pullman. Utah needed to get a win. Cam Rising wasn't playing. Bryson Barnes was able to come in the game and help Utah get a win. Bryson Barnes was never the reason that Utah won games, but he was part of the reason they won games. And that's all that Isaac Wilson has to be this year. Least we also forget with Isaac, he was an incredibly talented recruit coming to Utah, and he should have never saw the field last year. Sometimes you see players see the field early on and they're worse for it. And they don't get back to the heights in their career that they were hoping to reach before they saw that time when they weren't ready. But the hope is for Utah that Isaac, after what should be a leap, right? Freshman to sophomore year, we see players make their largest leap. Spencer Fano's leap was like solid left tackle. You can even say like average below average because he was getting rotated out at times. But then you look a year later and it's like, yeah, he's maybe the best tackle in college football entering year 3 of his career because how good he was in year 2. Do I think Isaac Wilson makes that size of a leap? No, but I think he's better. And I think that's all Utah is going to need to do to beat some of the teams on their schedule is get better quarterback play than they had last year, and not miles better, because I think that's what Devon Dampier is, but even just better, right? If you're telling me that Utah goes on the road and wins at West Virginia with Isaac Wilson because something happened to Devon Dampier, like I'm not shocked by that. We saw Isaac Wilson go down to Oklahoma State last year, incredibly hostile environment, and do enough to help Utah get the win. So I do believe Isaac is capable of helping this team win games, because what did I just talk about with Bryson? Bryson was a part of the reason Utah won. He was never the reason Utah won. Isaac would be part of the reason this team is winning. What would be the main reasons? Well, on offense, it's going to be that offensive line, which is the best in the Big 12 and one of the best in college football, with an amazing tackle duo too. What's another reason that Utah should be really good? Because how good that offensive line is, it should be the running game. This running game should feast. Wayshawn Parker and Naquai Rogers too. I think they're both going to have really good seasons. Also, an offensive coordinator in Jason Beck, who feels like, based on everything we're hearing, has been a home run hire for this Utah football team. I think Jason Beck is going to be phenomenal for this program. I think he's going to do a really good job putting his quarterbacks and his team in positions to succeed. So I do believe against the right opponents. Like, is Isaac Wilson going into Waco and getting a win? Probably not. That's a really good Baylor team, I think. There's a lot of games on this schedule, right? Kansas State, Arizona State, Texas Tech, where I'm like, if Isaac's your starter, it's going to be hard to win those games based on what we saw last year, even if we're factoring in an improvement, because we are still talking about a quarterback who threw more interceptions than touchdowns, 11-10, had the 121st ranked QBR in the country, had poor pocket presence at times, right, where he was very much affected by pressure, and threw for 1,510 yards. So he did some positive things last year, but overall it was obviously a mostly negative experience for Wilson, right? I mean, you could look to the games like the Colorado one where he threw a lot of passing yards, but still threw 3 picks there, 2 picks against Arizona, 2 picks against Oklahoma State still, even though Utah was able to win that game. He looked like someone that shouldn't have been playing last year, and while I expect him to be better, it's still going to be asking a lot from him. So, yeah, do I have my concerns about Wilson still like being that guy that Utah can turn to and win those games? I do. Like, there's absolutely a world where I talked about what Bryson Barnes did for Utah. There's absolutely a world where Isaac is not able to do that. And that Isaac's issues with pressure in his face and just going through his progressions rear their ugly head again, because as good as he's been in spring ball, fall camp, it sounds like it's always different when you're thrown into the fire of a game and can actually get hit. We saw it last year. Isaac won the job. And what ended up happening when he was in the game? He wasn't the best guy. Brandon Rose was a better gamer than Isaac was. So I do think there's concern there. I think we could still see Bert Ficklin. I've talked about multiple times on this show still, also speaking of quarterbacks. Like, I just have a hard time believing that Nate Johnson will never be used at the quarterback spot if they don't use him ever there, just because how good Devon Dampier is. That's one thing. But I just think it'd be a mistake to not use Nate, because as we've talked about on this show before, Nate's ability to run the ball is a higher ability than any other Utah quarterback has outside of Devon Dampier and any other particular skill set. His ability as a rushing QB is higher than Isaac's as a thrower. So I just believe you got to work ways in for Nate to run the ball. Also, a Nate Johnson, Wayshawn Parker, like Naquai Rogers, like there's just so many different things you can do with that. And I do believe Jason Beck, because Nate is listed as an athlete, already has creative plans in place for how he's going to use Nate Johnson this upcoming season. But we'll see. Right now, Isaac Wilson won the backup job. I'm not shocked that he won the backup job, because I do think he was the most experienced guy, and that's what led to him winning it out. He's played a year of college football and still has tons of talent. Joe Coles of the Deseret News has this quote from Kyle Whittingham when talking about Isaac. Just said the decision-making, his clock in his head, getting the ball out quicker, not holding onto it as long, the accuracy. He's just virtually improved across the board, which shouldn't be surprising. It's his second year of college football. He was thrown to the fire last year, learned a lot, and I do think is a guy that, if called upon against the right team, can help this team win. He's not going to come in and be the best quarterback on the field almost in any game he plays, in my opinion, but he's a guy that this team can win with if the development and the progress that we've heard he's making and the players and coaches can put him in a position to succeed. So it's important that Utah got backup quarterback figured out, and I do hope Bert Ficklin redshirts, and maybe if we see him in some games like the Cal Poly one, I'm excited about his future, but I think he should redshirt for sure. But as much as I think Isaac could be good for this team, I hope we don't see a lot of him, because I want to see as much as Devon Dampier as possible. I think Devon Dampier is going to be incredible. I think Devon Dampier is going to be part of one of the top duos in the Big 12, maybe even college football. What am I talking about? I'm going to tell you in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by PrizePicks. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. Whether you got your eye on a big-name quarterback or breakout running backs, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the game. Do you think Joe Burrow, Saquon Barkley, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers are going to have monster seasons? Well, PrizePicks is simple to play. You can pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and if you get those picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. Also, there's the flex play option. It's a total game changer. Even when one of your picks misses, you still double your money. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. You can download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, to get $150 in. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, just all caps, no spaces, to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 play. PrizePicks, run your game today. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or just staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. That's where Drip Drop comes in. When I'm on top of my hydration, I notice everything works better. My energy, my mood, my focus, even my skin. But getting enough fluids every day isn't always easy. That's why I've been loving Drip Drop. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. Use the perfect balance of sodium, electrolytes, and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. I always keep a few packets in my backpack. It saves me more than once from a midday crash after what is a very long work day as I'm just trying to get through it all. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com. Use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces. That's dripdrop.com. Use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits even harder as we enter the last stretch of summer. You can head over to Drip Drop today. I believe Devon Dampier is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football this season, even a top 10 quarterback. What's one of the things that makes him so special? His legs. Rushed for 1,000 yards last year, second in college, or tied for first in college football, according to Pro Football Focus, in the most forced missed tackles by any quarterback. How about also he had over 7 yards per carry, which was the best in the country, that mark. He was a little better than Jeremiah Love, like the great running back for Notre Dame. So Devon Dampier is special. He's transcendent. And he's one half of a duo that I think Utah has that is going to be absolutely special. Utah's, a couple of these seasons they've been defined by their outstanding duos, whether that's Cam Rising and Dalton Kincaid, Cam Rising and Brant Kuithe in some ways even. Utah, if they want to win the Big 12, get back to a conference championship caliber program, they're going to need a duo to step up. I believe that duo, Devon Dampier and his teammate in the backfield, Wayshawn Parker, the Washington State transfer, coming over after putting up over 700 yards on the ground last year with the Cougars, over 735 yards rushing, 137 carries, averaged 5.4 yards per carry a season ago. And Devon Dampier averaged 7.5 yards per carry himself. So those two guys are absolutely electric with their legs, and I truly believe they are going to make up what is the most formidable rushing tandem in not just the Big 12, but college football. I don't think there will be a quarterback, running back combination that rushes for more yards this college football season than Devon Dampier and Wayshawn Parker. I believe Wayshawn Parker gets over 1,000 yards. I know him and Naquari Rogers are 1A and 1B right now, but I think Parker's going to separate himself. I think Rogers will still get carries every single game, but I think we're really going to see this team lean on and rely on the abilities of Wayshawn Parker because he's a very talented back. He's got that home run hitting speed. He's a guy who can bounce off and break tackles, got good cuts, good feet. I really like his game, and I think he's ready to play P4 competition, true P4 competition, week in and week out, because Washington State did play a lot of G5 teams last year. So I think that he's ready. He was a huge part of that. Ben Arbuckle, the Washington State offensive coordinator last year, is now at Oklahoma. John Mateer was there too. Parker was a huge part of the reason too that offense was really good last year. And let's also not forget something. What did we just talk about in the first segment? Part of the reason I think Isaac Wilson's going to get better is because he's going to make a freshman to sophomore leap. And if I think Isaac Wilson is going to make a freshman to sophomore leap, with as much as he struggled, I think Wayshawn Parker is also making a huge leap this coming season. I think he's going to be one of the best backs in college football. I think he's going to be a top 15 to maybe even top 10 back. I think he's got that potential. When you look at the way his game is going to continue to grow and just develop and get better, the vision, the strength he's going to continue to put on and add, the confidence is already there. The swagger is too, which is the way he talks about, hey, I want to get 1,000 yards this season. And I believe him when he opens his mouth and talk about that. I'm not doubting that he can do it. So I do think that he's going to have a huge season for this Utah football team. And what am I going to do? Say Devon Dampier isn't going to absolutely tear it up with his legs too, after he rushing-wise ended the season with 4 games over 100 yards rushing. Once again, 4 games over 100-yard rushing. One of those, he had 207 yards against Wyoming. That was a game actually New Mexico lost last year. This is where it's funny when I've seen us up people before will bring up like, Devon Dampier, they didn't make a bowl game with him last year. Yeah, it's because he would lose games in which he scored 45 points because his team would lose 49-45. Like that's what he was working for. We already said this down on the show. Like if he had Utah's defense last year, where Utah's holding everyone to like around 20 points per game on average, that team last year, New Mexico, 10-2 overall. Funny how I now think, because Utah has a really good defense still, and now they have Devon Dampier and Jason Beck's offense, guess what I think Utah's going to go this year? 10-2. Do a schedule prediction show later this week, but that's what I'm feeling about this Utah team right now. Pair that offense with this defense, and I think the results are going to be massive. But Devon Dampier, we're talking about a guy who's been sacked 9 times in his collegiate career, and he's played a lot of games over 2 years. He was a full-time starter last year and was sacked 5 times. If he would have been sacked 5 times against just like Arizona or Washington State or even Auburn, I would have understood, because it's like, yeah, you have a G5 offensive line going against P4 defensive line. But Devon Dampier was still able to get out of sacks constantly, shake those defensive linemen, linebackers out of their cleats. He's a guy who does a good job not taking massive hits too, and he is just so elusive in the open field. And Utah is going to let Devon Dampier be Devon Dampier. Jason Beck incorporated a quarterback run game element in his offense a season ago. That's not going to disappear. When you have a Ferrari like Devon Dampier, you let him out. You don't just make him sit in the pocket where he's protected and just try to dice defenses up. That's not even his game either. I think he's going to make strides and progress as a thrower, but I have a hard time after he threw 12 interceptions last year to not believe like he's going to be under 5 this season. I think he's going to make some mistake, make some turnovers. I could even see him having a couple against UCLA as he just is making that adjustment to facing P4 defenses. But the one thing that's going to translate right away are his legs. He's incredibly elusive, incredibly hard to bring down. What was the stat I mentioned? Number 1 among quarterbacks in forced missed tackles a season ago, according to Pro Football Focus, or tied for number 1. He's a tremendous athlete. So is Wayshawn Parker. Also, if you're going to be a really good rushing duo and just have an effective rushing offense, what do you need? An outstanding offensive line. We already talked about Utah having one of the 10 best offensive lines in college football this season. Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomore are the best tackle tandem in college football. And while I have some questions about Utah's interior offensive line, I still think they're going to be really dang good, right? Michael Mokafisi has played a ton of football, even though I still think there's room to grow and improve. And yeah, he was injured in the spring, but he won a Pac-12 championship as a starter for this team a couple years ago. So you're getting consistent play there. So Noah Tonga, I thought, had his ups and downs last year, but he was still an effective run blocker overall, and I think he's only going to continue to grow and get better another year at guard. And Jaron Kump is a guy this team fully believes in. He was voted a captain. I have my questions about Jaron Kump based on what we've seen, but if only one offensive lineman is, to me, a major concern, even if I think Tongai and Mokafisi could use improvement, but based on what I just saw from Kump last year, I'd say his play is majorly concerning. But everyone's confident in him. And I'm starting to come around as well, too. Like, hey, if you guys believe in this, if you think it's the best option, then roll him out there. And hopefully he can have the type of season that shuts up all the doubters like me at times even. But either way, this Utah team is going to have a very good offensive line. I think the tight end run blocking should hopefully improve another year for Dallin Bentley in there. But either way, tight ends aren't a massive part of this offense. And who knows what creative ways Utah might as well try to get extra blockers on the field and the things they're going to try to do. The culture of this team is going to continue to be how they run the football. They got a dynamic quarterback and running back who can do it. I believe Devon Dampier and Wayshawn Parker are going to set the college football world on fire in the ground game. I think this is a team that is going to – I do think Utah leads the Big 12 in rushing this coming season. I think because of Devon Dampier, I think he gets 1,000 yards on the ground. I think Wayshawn gets 1,000 yards on the ground. I think it's a formidable 1-2 punch in the backfield, and that offensive line that acts as the sledgehammer that makes that 1-2 punch even more effective, because there's only so much you have to punch through when everyone is doing their job up front, taking on their blockers, moving or taking on their defensive linemen, moving them downfield, absorbing linebackers, reaching the second level. This is what I believe this Utah offensive line is capable of at a high level. They got great coaching, and I really think that Devon Dampier and Jason Beck's offense, Mark Atuai, what he's doing with his running back room, especially Wayshawn Parker, is going to be a force to be reckoned with. Utah was born for the physicality of the Big 12. It's how they were able to best teams in the Pac-12. And this is a team to me that is ready to put the Big 12 on notice with their physical play style this coming season. We know the starters are going to be for this Utah football team. We don't know what the backups are really going to look like at key spots, and we're not going to, potentially. Kyle Whittingham is playing it coy about releasing a depth chart. We're going to talk about what that means in a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you needed a service. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone, so you never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communication. Do you just juggle 2 phones just to try to keep your business afloat and then try to have personal calls be separate? Well, Open Phone solves that issue instantly. See why over 60,000 businesses trust Open Phone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedoncollege. That's openphone.com/lockedoncollege. They'll even port over your existing number for free. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. When you try Open Phone today. For the 2025 college football season and moving forward, there will officially be injury reports. Yes, this is a massive win for the Big 12 and college football. It's a massive win because college football, the way it's covered and followed as closely as it is, you can release an injury report. Like, it's just not that big of a deal. I know Kyle loves his competitive advantage, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, but the transparency, like, just let us know, man. It's been such honestly, I wonder if there weren't conversations about why injury reports were needed to is because of what happened with Cam Rising, like where he had to endure and go through what was going on, where people start to question if he's going to play because Kyle's trying to maintain a competitive advantage and play it coy on if he's available or not. So I'm really glad that we're getting injury reports. I think it's just ridiculous that it had taken so long for us to get to the point that we're going to get to that. And I'm glad they're going to adhere to this injury report rule. But unfortunately, and it is just for conference games also, Kyle Whittingham said that because they do have to do an injury report, that doesn't mean necessarily that they have to do a depth chart. If you give us something, they're going to take away something else, right? So basically, in the past few years, Utah's released a depth chart, and Kyle is not going to release a depth chart for what I can only assume is no competitive advantage to do it. Do I get what he's saying? Yes. Do I think he's making a mountain out of a molehill? And he does this a lot. And I love Kyle. I really do. I'm grateful for everything he's done in his career, and maybe Morgan will be the same way and won't release a depth chart. But to me, this is just one of those things like, why? Why do you need to hold on to like what depth chart, everything? Like, you've even released depth charts and then you've lied about them. I remember covering this team leading into the Florida game a couple of years ago, and Satau Laumea was supposed to be your starting left guard, and then you'll line him up at right tackle over there. So if you're going to lie on the depth chart sometime anyways, like, what's the issue releasing one? For as closely as we love and cover and follow this team, like, I just don't think it's that big of a deal. And I just don't think, I guess the only thing I can think of like why you wouldn't release a depth chart is you don't want some coach to see some unknown defensive tackle or whoever it is on your roster as a backup and be like, oh, we don't know about that guy. We need to look into him. But then it'll be like, for some of the guys, especially like defensive tackles, it's like Jonah Laea. It'll be like, oh, that dude barely played. So yeah, you're not going to know what to expect from him because he's new, because why do we need to not have depth charts? Like, why can't you just release a depth chart? It's just, the fans get excited about it. Everyone enjoys covering it. Teams all across the country do it. Like, I looked this up earlier, like how many teams release an official depth chart, and it's nearly almost all of them that actually will do it because it just doesn't, it's not some competitive advantage. It doesn't make that crazy of a difference or anything, right? I think this stuff gets so blown out of proportion by Kyle of what a competitive advantage it is. I mean, everyone knows Devon Dampier is your starting quarterback. I think people can really quickly look at your roster and be like, yeah, Naquari Rogers, Wayshawn Parker, probably your top 2 guys. Also, like, you're literally commenting. I know Utah has a couple surprises and wrinkles they'll work in, I'm sure, but you can just hide those. You have in the past. I just don't see how releasing a depth chart really hurts this team. And everyone in college football is doing it. So I don't know why Utah and Kyle continue just to choose to be difficult and zig while everyone else is zagging, because it really doesn't like make that much of a competitive advantage. I'd love to see one of you let me know if I'm crazy. Like, why? And I know Kyle's whole point would be like, what advantage does it give us? It doesn't really give you, of course, it doesn't give you an advantage to release one, but everyone who wants to know what's going on with this team, like, it's really, you could just release one. It's not that big of a thing, and people are curious and they want to know what's going on, and it really doesn't have many repercussions or ramifications on what happens in week 1. People care about it. They want to know about it. Everyone else just does it. So why does Utah decide to be difficult always? Like, this is just how Utah operates. And I love that school and the program, and I'm grateful for my time up there and everything. But just, I mean, it's the same thing where media members all across the country and fan bases across the country then thus get to hear about it, have access to watching parts of fall camp. Utah doesn't allow that because of a competitive advantage. Yet teams all across the country allow that, and they go on, a lot of them, to have better seasons than Utah does. So is it really that much of a crazy difference? Like, is it really make that much of a difference? I know Kyle's thing is like, doesn't even want to allow the singlest, slightest advantage. I can understand it, but I think it just gets blown out of proportion far too often. And I do think this is an example where I'm really excited. We have injury reports so we can get clarity on what's going on, guys, leading into the game. The will he play, won't he play is exhausting. It's been exhausting for years. I'm glad we're done with that. But now it's just like, you can't give us both things. If we get one thing, you're like, well, I want this back then. If you make me release an injury report, which Kyle always talked about, he's like, oh, if they had mandate one, we'll release one. It's like, yeah, you have to release one. Like, he always made it sound like they'd be so overjoyed to do it. There's no way Kyle Whittingham, I don't have it as a source, there's no way Kyle Whittingham would have voted like, yes, injury reports all the way around. With the way he handles it and how much more seriously he seems to take it than everyone else, I just can't see that being the case. So once again, I just don't understand the infatuation with being different than everyone else and for the slightest competitive advantage. I think it's overblown. I think it doesn't matter. And I think this is where Utah gets ridiculous about some of this stuff. Like, why is it such a big deal if you release a depth chart and we see who your backup defensive end is? I just don't think it makes that much of a difference. Everyone else is doing it. Why be difficult? That's how I feel about the situation. But, Kyle is going to do what Kyle does. This is where an example of, in some ways, I do hope Kyle can go out on top and then exit stage left. I feel like in some ways, and look, replacing Kyle Whittingham's a monster task, but this is one of those areas where it's just like, college football, things have kind of changed a little bit. I think Kyle can go out on top this year. He's still a really good coach, but I feel like it in many ways is time for Morgan to take over. We see what he can do with this program, a fresher perspective, all of that I think could benefit this Utah team, but we'll see what changes. One thing we hope changes is that Utah's a much better year this year than last year. And if you want to see if Utah is capable of that, make sure you continue to tune in Locked On Utes each and every day. If you're in the market for a second listen, check out Locked On College Football, where Spencer McLaughlin keeps you covered on the latest going around the greatest sport on planet Earth, as he often says. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you again for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We'll be back with you tomorrow talking about the latest and greatest for the University of Utah football program.